Hello children. In laws of motion we have the next topic, that is called friction. We know that the friction, it is the opposing force which always act in the opposite direction to the direction of motion of the object. In the old theory of the friction, it is said that when the two bodies are in contact, then their molecules interlock each other, or we can say there is a force between them which always oppose the motion. And according to the old theory, it is said that the force of friction that depends upon area. But in the modern theory, we can say that here the two surfaces are in contact, but actually this is the actual area of the contact, and when we seen from here this is called, so this is called apparent area. So here actual area is very less as compared to the apparent area. Now the adhesive pressure between the molecules of the two surfaces, that is, we can say here adhesive pressure, that is equals to, we can say that pressure is equal to, that is force upon area. If the actual area of a contact is less, then now we can write here that adhesive pressure between the molecules, that will be more. If the adhesive pressure between the molecules is more, then there is large force of attraction between the molecules. So this is the reason, or you can say this is the cause of the friction between the surface. Now we have three types of the friction. First is called static friction. Second is called limiting friction. And third one is called kinetic friction. What is static friction here? If the object is at rest and it remain at rest, here we are applying the force on the object, but the actual motion that do not start. So we can say the friction which comes into play, that is called static friction. Here we can say that static friction is directly proportional to the applied force. So we can say the value of the static friction that depends upon the applied force. Static friction do not have its own value, but it depends upon the applied force. If the applied force is 5 Newton, then static friction that will be 5. If the applied force is 10 Newton, then static friction will be 10. If the applied force is 15, then static friction that will be 15. But remember one thing, that the motion is not started yet. Means the object remains at rest when we change the force, or if the force is increased, but the object remain at the rest. So we can say if the object is at rest, so between the surface there is a force of friction, that is known as here, that is known as static friction Fs. So you can say that static friction that is directly proportional to the applied force. It do not have its own value. So we can say that static friction is a self-adjusting, because it do not have its own value, but it depends upon the applied force. Second is called limiting friction. Limiting friction, it is the highest value of static friction. Highest value of static friction, that is known as limiting friction. Suppose we apply the force of 20 Newton on the object and the motion is not started, but if we apply more than 20 Newton, then the motion of the object that will be started. So here this 20 Newton, this is the highest value of the static friction, because after 20 Newton the object will comes into motion. So this is the highest value of the static friction. So we can say that highest value of the static friction, that is known as limiting friction. Now Third is kinetic friction. What is kinetic friction? If the object is in motion, then the force of friction between the object and the surface, that is known as kinetic friction. Kinetic friction is also of two types. First is called, we can say here that first is sliding friction and second is known as rolling friction. What is sliding friction? If the object is sliding on the surface, then we can say that it is a sliding friction, and if the object is rolling, then we can say that it is a rolling friction. What is the cause of rolling friction here? That we can say, if this is an object, then due to the pressure, it creates a mount here like this. From this mount, large force is required to come out from this mount. So the friction which opposes the motion, that is known as rolling friction.